My name is Sienna. At 33, I am the chief executive of a top-tier cybersecurity firm, but my family treats me like a runaway teenager. My parents forbade me from celebrating my 17th birthday because my sister did not feel special enough. So I moved out that night. Years later, their golden daughter saw how successful I had become, and her jealous meltdown shattered the family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The text message from my father arrived demanding my presence at his real estate office. I walked through the glass doors of Richard Wilson Realty exactly 30 minutes later. The place smelled of stale coffee and desperation. It was a far cry from the booming empire my father always boasted about. I found him in his corner office frantically clicking his mouse while surrounded by unpaid invoices. He did not look up. He pointed at the cheap chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Sienna," he ordered. "We have business to discuss." I remained standing. "You summoned me to this office, Richard. Please make it quick. I have an actual business to run." He looked up, his face reddening with the familiar anger he reserved for me. "You listen to me," he snapped. "You caused a massive scene at the restaurant last night. Madison cried all the way home. Kendrick was asking questions we had to deflect. You owe this family an apology, and you are going to pay it by doing the tech work for your sister's new startup for free." I looked at him, suppressing a laugh. "Madison runs a wellness startup now. Last year she was a lifestyle influencer, and before that she designed overpriced yoga mats." Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "This is a legitimate enterprise. Kendrick has secured the seed funding from his accounts. Madison needs a secure payment gateway and back-end server to protect her customer data. Since you play around with fixing computers, you are going to set it up. Consider it back rent for all the years we fed you before you abandoned us." "You mean before you kicked me out at 17 because I refused to co-sign a fraudulent loan for you?" I corrected him, my voice calm. He ignored my statement, pointing a thick finger at my face. "Do the tech work for your sister, or I will ensure you never get a corporate client in this city again. I know powerful people in Chicago, Sienna. I can ruin your repair hobby with one phone call." The audacity of a man drowning in debt threatening the chief executive of a cybersecurity firm was poetic. I did not correct his delusion. Instead, I opened my briefcase and pulled out a tablet displaying a legal document. "Fine," I said. "I will run a comprehensive diagnostic and security setup for Madison's startup, but I do not work without a signed contract. It is standard procedure." I placed the tablet on his desk. "This is a non-disclosure and liability agreement. It states my firm is not legally responsible for any pre-existing structural flaws or financial irregularities we uncover during our deep dive into her servers." Richard snatched the tablet, his eyes scanning only the bold header. "You always have to make things difficult, do you not? Always demanding paperwork like you are some hotshot corporate lawyer." He scoffed, grabbing the electronic stylus. "You should be grateful I am giving you a chance to associate your name with Madison's brand." He scribbled his signature at the bottom of the screen, handing the tablet back without reading a single line of the fine print. Had he bothered to read Clause 4, he would have realized he just legally authorized my firm to report any federal financial crimes we discovered directly to the authorities. I slipped the tablet back into my briefcase and turned my body toward the office door. "I will have the initial scan done by noon," I told him. "Do not ever say I never did anything for this family." I left his decaying office building without another backward glance and immediately stepped into the spacious back of my waiting black luxury car. 20 minutes later, the private elevator doors parted on the 50th floor of the Oracle Cyber Intelligence Tower. The sleek glass walls of my massive corporate headquarters offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire Chicago skyline. Dozens of elite analysts and top-tier security experts moved purposefully through the modern open floor plan. I bypassed my private corner office and walked straight into the central command room, tossing my briefcase onto the massive glass conference table. My chief financial officer, David, was already waiting for me. He had a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and a thick stack of printed server logs in the other. He looked up as I approached, his expression unusually grim for a man who normally handled corporate espionage with a casual, easy smile. "I have the signed authorization," I told him, tapping the leather side of my briefcase. Tell me you found something highly interesting on my sister's shiny new wellness startup. David set his coffee mug down heavily and spread the dense server logs across the smooth glass table. Interesting is definitely not the word I would use. David said, his voice dropping to a serious low tone. I ran the deep dive diagnostic program just like you asked. I deployed our absolute best scraping tools to map out their entire digital infrastructure, their payment gateways, and their product code. I looked down at the complicated strings of red data highlighting the printed pages. What did you find? David looked back up at me completely and utterly stunned by the raw data. Nothing, Sienna. I found absolutely nothing. I frowned deeply, leaning my body closer to the printouts. What do you mean you found nothing? Are their servers completely offline right now? He shook his head slowly, pointing a silver pen at a series of massive financial transfers. I mean, this wellness startup has zero product code. There is no user database, no secure payment gateway for customers, and no actual wellness service being rendered anywhere on this network. The entire website is just a hollow digital facade. It is a fake shell company, Sienna. And based on these hidden back-end routing numbers, it is actively funneling millions of dollars directly from a private medical trust fund. I stared at the glowing red data lines reflecting on the glass conference table. The magnitude of what David just uncovered settled heavily in the quiet command room. My parents and my sister were not just running a failing business. They were actively orchestrating a massive financial fraud. Track those routing numbers silently. I instructed David, keeping my voice deadpan to mask the boiling anger beneath the surface. Do not trigger any external firewalls. I need to know exactly whose trust fund Madison is draining. David typed rapidly across his dual keyboards. The origin account traces back to the Thornton Medical Legacy Trust, he confirmed, looking up. That is a generational wealth fund belonging to Dr. Kendrick Thornton, your brother-in-law. The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. Madison and Richard were not just stealing from nameless investors. They were financially bleeding an honorable, innocent man who had done absolutely nothing but love my sister. Kendrick was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon, a man who saved lives and carried his family prestigious legacy with immense pride. He had no idea he was sleeping next to a parasite. Keep monitoring the network, I told David, grabbing my coat. Set up a real-time alert for any outbound transfers. I need to pay a visit to a doctor. 1 hour later, I walked into the pristine reception area of the Thornton Orthopedic Institute in downtown Chicago. The clinic screamed quiet luxury and generational success. I had called ahead under the guise of experiencing a flare-up of an old college running injury. Kendrick emerged from a set of double-frosted doors, wearing a crisp white coat over tailored scrubs. His smile was immediate and genuinely warm. Sienna, he said, pulling me into a brief, welcoming hug. It is great to see you. I was surprised when my receptionist said you were out front. We usually only see you at those incredibly tense family dinners. I forced a polite smile as he led me down the bright corridor into his private examination room. I am trying to take better care of my health this year, I replied smoothly. My left knee has been acting up and I figured I should see the absolute best in the city. Kendrick checked my chart and began a routine physical examination of the joint. He was thorough, professional, and radiating the kind of inherent decency that made my stomach twist with guilt. As he tested my mobility, his natural charisma bled into the conversation. I am really glad you stopped by, he said, writing notes on his digital pad. Madison has been working around the clock on her new wellness startup. She is incredibly stressed, but I am so immensely proud of her drive. I actually just injected $2 million from my family medical trust into her company yesterday morning. I want to fully support her dreams, you know. It is what a good husband does. My blood ran ice cold. $2 million. I looked at this intelligent, successful man, realizing he truly believed he was funding a revolutionary digital wellness platform. He thought he was building an empire with his wife. He had absolutely zero clue that the money had vanished into a hollow digital shell company before the ink on the transfer wire was even fully dry. You are a very supportive husband, I said, carefully testing the waters. Does Madison share the financial logistics with you often? Kendrick laughed a rich, warm sound. Not really. She handles the business end with your father. Richard has been mentoring her. Speaking of your family, I wanted to tell you that I really admire your resilience, Sienna. He paused, his expression softening into one of misplaced pity. Madison told me everything about your past. She told me how you struggled with a severe gambling addiction when you were a teenager. She said that is why you ran away from home at 17 to escape the debt collectors. I just want to say I am really glad you finally turned your life around and found a little computer repair job that keeps you stable. I sat perfectly still on the examination table. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They had not just stolen my college fund. They had completely rewritten my personal history to paint me as a degenerate criminal, ensuring Kendrick would never take anything I said seriously. I let out a cold, sharp laugh that echoed off the sterile clinic walls. Gambling? I asked, locking my eyes directly onto his confused face. Is that what they call it now? Is that what my father calls forcing me to empty my grandmother's college trust fund? To bail out his catastrophic commercial real estate failures? Kendrick froze, his hand hovering over his digital notepad. What are you talking about? Madison said you stole the family savings to gamble. I did not gamble a single dime, Kendrick. I stated, my voice slicing through the room like a razor blade. I left home at 17 because Richard forged my signature to drain my accounts, and my mother fully supported him. I refused to let them destroy my future to fund their fake wealthy lifestyle. They painted me as a runaway addict because the truth would ruin their country club reputation. Kendrick stared at me, completely stunned. The pieces of the false narrative his wife had sold him were beginning to fracture. I could see his brilliant analytical mind trying to reconcile the kind, quiet woman sitting in front of him with the chaotic addict his wife had described. Before he could ask another question, my custom tablet chimed loudly from inside my designer bag. It was the high-priority push notification I had instructed David to set up. I pulled the device out. The encrypted data flashed bright red across my screen. I looked up, meeting Kendrick's worried gaze. Madison just initiated a $500,000 wire transfer into Richard's hidden offshore account. The transfer notification flashed on my screen, locking the final piece of the puzzle into place. I excused myself from Kendrick, citing a sudden business emergency, and left the clinic. I had exactly 48 hours to prepare for the Thornton family annual charity gala. This was not just a social event. It was a gathering of Chicago elite, a high society cornerstone hosted by Kendrick's deeply respected, incredibly powerful African-American family. His mother was a retired federal judge, his father a pioneer in pediatric neurosurgery. They were generational wealth built on public service and absolute integrity. My sister had somehow slithered into their ranks, but tonight her mask was going to slip. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was transformed into a glittering sea of crystal chandeliers, white orchids, and towering ice sculptures. I arrived wearing a custom midnight blue silk gown. It was a masterpiece of understated luxury, designed exclusively for me by a prominent French house. I moved through the crowd of politicians, corporate titans, and medical luminaries holding a glass of sparkling water. Madison and my mother Patricia, dripping in diamonds that Kendrick had undoubtedly paid for, excused themselves toward the marble hallway leading to the private restrooms. I timed my interception perfectly, slipping into the opulent mirrored corridor just as the heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them. They spotted me immediately. My mother's carefully lifted face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. She marched forward, her heavy diamond necklace catching the harsh light of the vanity mirrors. "What on earth are you doing here?" Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid echoing into the main ballroom. "Did you sneak in through the service elevator?" Madison flanked her left side, crossing her arms over her sequined bodice. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my dress with a practiced, condescending sneer. "You have got a lot of nerve showing up here in that cheap knockoff gown, Sienna. This is a $5,000 a plate charity dinner. You do not belong in this tax bracket. I'm going to have the hotel security drag you out the back door before Kendrick or his parents see you." I did not flinch, and I certainly did not cower the way they expected me to. "You are not going to call security, Madison," I said, my voice completely level. Because if you cause a scene, people might start asking questions about why you are so desperate to hide your own sister. Patricia took another step forward, her manicured finger pointing aggressively at my face. You are a disgrace to this family, she snapped. We let you do the tech work for the startup to give you a crumb of credibility, and this is how you repay us. By crashing a high society event to embarrass us. Get out right now before I make sure you spend the night in a holding cell for trespassing. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, feeling a profound sense of pity for their utter ignorance. I calmly adjusted the strap of my custom silk gown, smoothing the flawless fabric. First of all, Patricia, this dress is vintage Dior, not a knockoff, I explained with a relaxed, effortless smile. Second, I was personally invited by the hospital board of directors. Funny that you think I do not belong in this tax bracket, Madison, considering my firm. Oracle Cyber Intelligence just donated $500,000 to fund the new pediatric orthopedic wing tonight. Madison froze, her perfectly glossed lips parting in shock. You donated $500,000, she stammered, her eyes darting nervously to our mother. That is impossible. You fix broken laptops. I founded Oracle Cyber Intelligence 7 years ago. I corrected her, savoring the absolute panic blooming across her face. We secure digital infrastructure for international banks and defense contractors. I own the building Richard came to beg in yesterday. And speaking of money, Madison, what exactly did your highly successful wellness startup donate to your husband's charity gala tonight? Let me guess, absolutely nothing. Because you cannot donate funds from a shell company when you have already wired every single cent to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under Richard's name. The blood completely drained from my sister's face. She stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor. Patricia grabbed her arm, looking frantically between the two of us, finally realizing that the daughter she had thrown away held the keys to their destruction. You are lying! Patricia gasped, though her voice shook with mounting terror. You cannot possibly know anything about our finances. I smiled, stepping closer to them. I know that you initiated a $500,000 wire transfer at exactly 10 in the morning yesterday. I know you used a fake vendor invoice to bypass the trust fund security protocols. I know everything about your fraud. Before Madison could formulate a lie to defend herself, a sharp, authoritative voice echoed through the marble corridor, freezing the air in the room. Is there a problem with the startup's liquidity, Madison? Stepping out of the shadows near the Velvet Lounge area was Kendrick's mother, Judge Eleanor Thornton. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s, radiating power and uncompromising intellect. She wore a tailored emerald suit, her posture rigid, her dark eyes fixed on my sister with the intensity of a predator assessing its prey. Madison turned a sickly shade of pale, her hands trembling violently at her sides. Eleanor, she squeaked, her voice barely a whisper. I can explain. We were just talking about a minor cash flow adjustment. Judge Thornton stepped fully into the light, ignoring Madison completely, and turning her piercing gaze directly onto me. You mentioned a $500,000 wire transfer to an offshore account, she stated, her tone demanding absolute factual accuracy. Tell me exactly what she is currently hiding from us tonight. The fallout from the charity gala happened faster than I anticipated. Madison was backed into a corner by Judge Thornton, stumbling through a pathetic excuse about accounting delays before fleeing the venue in tears. But a cornered rat is still dangerous. Less than 12 hours later, my phone began vibrating continuously on my nightstand. It was not Kendrick demanding answers or my father issuing threats. It was David, my chief financial officer, calling at 6 in the morning on a Sunday. I answered the call, my mind instantly shifting into corporate defense mode as I listened to him breathe heavily. You need to check your sister's social media accounts immediately, David said, his voice completely devoid of its usual calm demeanor. She just dropped a highly produced, heavily edited video, and it is going viral across every major platform. I opened my tablet and navigated to Madison's page. There she was, sitting on a plush white sofa, wearing absolutely no makeup and crying perfect synchronized tears. She stared directly into the camera lens, performing the role of the terrified victim flawlessly. She told her millions of followers that she was currently living inside a waking nightmare because of my actions. She claimed her estranged, deeply troubled older sister was a dangerous cyber stalker who was actively trying to hack into her wellness startup out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. Madison did not hold back a single devastating detail in her fabricated narrative. She spun a harrowing tale of how I had supposedly harbored a toxic obsession with her since childhood. She claimed my sudden appearance at the charity gala was an aggressive ambush meant to intimidate her and extort money from her husband's charitable foundation. She actually looked into the camera and begged her loyal community for protection and support today. She stated she feared for her physical safety and the digital security of her loyal customers. It was a masterclass in digital manipulation, specifically designed to assassinate my character and destroy the professional reputation I had spent the last 7 years meticulously building from the ground up without any of their help. The real betrayal came an hour later when my parents entered the digital fray. Richard and Patricia shared Madison's tearful video directly to their own extensive networks. They added a joint statement that made my blood boil with sheer rage. They wrote that they were completely heartbroken today. They claimed they were actively praying for my mental health. They publicly apologized to Madison's followers for my supposed digital terrorism, cementing the lie that I was a deranged, jealous sibling determined to tear down my sister's innocent business. They weaponized their parental authority to validate her fraudulent claims, using the exact same tactics they employed when they kicked me out at 17 to cover up my father's financial crimes. The professional consequences were instantaneous and severe. By noon, the main switchboard at Oracle's cyber intelligence was completely overwhelmed. David walked into my office carrying a thick stack of messages. They were urgent inquiries from our top-tier corporate clients. Banks, defense contractors, and international healthcare providers were demanding immediate reassurance regarding our security protocols. When the chief executive officer of a premier cybersecurity firm is publicly accused of malicious hacking and extortion by her own flesh and blood, client trust evaporates instantly. Our board of directors requested an emergency meeting. David looked at me, waiting for me to draft a public denial or release a counterstatement to stop the massive bleeding. He expected me to defend myself against my family. I did not panic, and I definitely refused. I certainly did not instruct our public relations team to draft a defensive rebuttal. Engaging in a public shouting match with a professional influencer is a losing battle. It only feeds the algorithm and validates their desperate need for attention. I looked at David and pushed the stack of worried client messages aside. Cancel the emergency board meeting and carefully reroute all client inquiries to legal, I ordered, turning my attention back to my primary workstation. Instead, we are going to do exactly what we do best. I pulled the raw, uncompressed file of Madison's viral video directly from the platform's backend servers using our proprietary scraping software. Madison thought she was simply uploading a video to gain sympathy, completely ignorant of the invisible data she was leaving behind. Every digital file contains hidden metadata, a silent footprint detailing exactly when, how, and where it was created. I ran the file through our advanced forensic decryptor, stripping away the visual content to isolate the network routing information. I watched the green text scroll rapidly across my primary monitor, waiting for the origin location to confirm my suspicions. The forensic scan finished highlighting a specific, highly secure Internet Protocol address code. I cross-referenced the address with global satellite registries. Madison was not crying on her living room sofa in Chicago like she wanted her followers to believe. The video was uploaded from a private encrypted satellite router located on a luxury yacht currently anchored in the coastal waters of Miami, Florida. I stared at the precise geographical coordinates, a cold, calculating smile spreading across my face. Madison was supposed to be in Chicago dealing with the fallout of her fraudulent startup, not vacationing on a private vessel. I pulled up the deep-dive financial audit we had legally conducted earlier. Because Richard had arrogantly signed my liability contract, I still had legal access to monitor the routing numbers connected to the Thornton Medical Trust. I initiated a targeted trace on the yacht's maritime registration and matched it against recent outbound expenditures from Kendrick's accounts. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating clarity. The credit card funding the vessel was registered to Kendrick, but the signature authorizing the massive lease belonged entirely to Madison. She was currently floating off the coast of Miami, burning through his money, and Kendrick had absolutely no idea his loving wife was even in Florida today. The revelation of Madison sunbathing on a leased yacht in Miami, while Kendrick believed she was working tirelessly in Chicago, was the ultimate ammunition. I did not need to release a public statement defending myself against her fabricated video. I simply forwarded the geographic coordinates and the corresponding maritime financial receipts directly to Kendrick's private email server. Let the loyal husband connect the dots. The real threat was not Madison playing the victim on social media. It was Richard realizing that my firm held the undeniable proof of his entire financial embezzlement scheme. He knew the digital audit we conducted. He knew the exact routing numbers he used to siphon the Thornton Medical Trust were fully documented. I knew it was only a matter of time before he made a desperate and reckless move. That move happened at exactly 9 in the morning on Tuesday. The glass doors of the Oracle Cyber Intelligence corporate lobby violently swung open. Richard barged into my meticulously designed reception area, his face flushed a dangerous shade of red. He was flanked by a remarkably sweaty and disheveled man clutching a battered leather briefcase. This was clearly not a high-powered and expensive corporate litigator. Richard had found the cheapest and most desperate attorney, willing to follow him into a fight he had already lost. They marched directly toward the main reception desk, where my head of security protocols, Elena, was monitoring the morning access logs. Richard slammed a thick stack of aggressively stapled papers onto the pristine marble counter, with enough force to echo through the expansive atrium. "I demand to see Sienna immediately," Richard barked, leaning over the desk in a blatant attempt to physically intimidate her. He pointed a shaking finger directly at the documents. "That is a legally binding court order." "It is a cease and desist," he shouted. "You are going to take me to your server room right now. I am claiming full corporate ownership of all data related to the Madison Wellness platform. Every single file, every audit log, and every server backup belongs to me. You are going to hand it over today, or my lawyer here is going to shut this entire building down by noon." Elena did not flinch at his aggressive tone. She simply pressed the silent alert button under her desk, notifying my executive suite that a hostile presence had breached the downstairs. I watched the entire pathetic display through the high-definition security cameras from my corner office. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored charcoal blazer, and signaled my lead corporate counsel, Marcus Vance. Marcus was a former federal prosecutor who commanded rooms simply by walking into them. He nodded, gesturing for two of our senior compliance attorneys to join us. We took the private executive elevator down to the lobby. The elevator doors slid open with a soft and melodic chime, instantly drawing Richard's manic attention. I walked into the expansive lobby flanked by my elite legal team. The sheer contrast was almost comical. Marcus and my attorneys radiated absolute and uncompromising authority in their bespoke suits, carrying nothing but digital tablets containing irrefutable proof. Richard and his discount lawyer looked like cornered scavengers completely out of their depth. Richard puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his false bravado as we approached the reception desk. I did not greet him. I did not acknowledge his cheap lawyer. I calmly picked up the stack of papers he had slammed onto Elena's desk. I glanced at the first page, reading the poorly drafted and legally baseless and arrogant demands. The document was a joke, a desperate bluff meant to scare a novice. But I was not a novice. I looked directly into my father's furious and bloodshot eyes. I grasped the thick stack of papers with both hands and slowly, deliberately ripped the fake cease and desist order perfectly in half. I dropped the torn pieces into the nearest recycling bin. "You signed my standard liability contract when you arrogantly strolled into my office demanding a free security audit." "Richard," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the silent lobby, Did you actually bother reading it first? Did you read the terms of service before you put your pen to the paper? His jaw clenched tightly, a sudden flicker of genuine panic replacing his manufactured rage. Clause 4 of our standard corporate agreement is very specific. I continued, stepping closer to him, completely unbothered by his aggressive stance. It states that in the event of any fraudulent activity, embezzlement, or financial laundering discovered during our routine security audit, we are legally bound to report it. I did not just report your offshore accounts to Kendrick. I reported your massive corporate theft to the Internal Revenue Service. Today, the color vanished from Richard's face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. The cheap lawyer beside him literally took a step backward, desperately trying to physically distance himself from the sudden and massive legal liability standing next to him. "You ungrateful and miserable little brat, Richard," hissed, thick beads of sweat breaking out across his forehead. He lost whatever remaining shred of self-control he possessed. He lunged forward, raising his fist, fully intending to strike me right there in the middle of my own corporate headquarters. He never even got close. My security team materialized from shadows. Instantly, they moved with terrifying speed. Two heavily built guards grabbed Richard's arms, twisting them behind his back, with practiced and unyielding efficiency. They marched him backward toward the revolving glass doors. "You will pay for this!" Richard screamed, kicking wildly as the security guards shoved him out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. "You hear me. I will destroy you." I watched him stumble onto the pavement, his cheap lawyer scurrying away down the street. The lobby doors locked. My lead attorney turned to me. "The IRS just approved the subpoena for Richard's offshore accounts," he stated to me right now. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind Richard, leaving a ringing silence. I stood in the atrium, my pulse a rhythmic drumbeat against my ribs. Marcus slipped his tablet back into his briefcase, shifting from enforcer to strategist. The IRS subpoena was just the opening salvo. We had their financial throats in our grip, but I needed the entire anatomy of their deception. I turned to Elena, instructing her to lock down the floor and order black coffee. We were not going home tonight. 10 minutes later, I walked into the server hub, a fortress pulsing with glowing blue LED arrays. David was stationed at the primary console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. When my father demanded the Madison Wellness Platform data, he inadvertently confirmed their entire operational history was stored on the cloud servers we just legally seized. I synchronized my workstation with David's terminal. Break open the secondary encrypted partitions I ordered. Start with the routing numbers we gave Kendrick and work backward. I want to see every transaction they executed since the shell company was incorporated. We are stripping their financial history to the bedrock. Decryption required brute force algorithms to crack firewalls Richard believed were impenetrable. Hours bled into the night. The city skyline outside the windows shifted from dusk to absolute darkness. At 2 a.m, David let out a sharp breath. The firewall collapsed, exposing offshore ledgers, hidden banking profiles, and dummy corporation tax filings. I leaned forward, scanning the rapid flow of data scrolling down the monitor. This was not a simple embezzlement scheme hastily thrown together to fund Madison's startup. The financial architecture was complex, layered with dummy vendors, phantom consulting fees, and routed through international banking havens. "Look at these early transactions," David said, pointing to data highlighted in red. "This goes beyond the Thornton Medical Trust. Kendrick was just their latest, most lucrative target." I initiated a chronological sort, filtering the records by their creation dates. The timeline expanded, pushing back 5, then 8, then 10 years. The data logs stretched further into the past, exposing a systematic methodology of theft. My parents and my sister had been running variations of this exact con game for a decade. They had drained small investors, manipulated business partners, and funneled the stolen capital into a domestic trust. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as my eyes locked onto a specific folder buried at the bottom of the directory. The folder was secured with an outdated cipher protocol that David easily bypassed in 60 seconds. The file name was simply listed as the Grandmother Estate. I opened the digital ledger and the breath left my lungs. Staring back at me were scanned copies of bank transfers, forged signature authorizations, and property deeds dating back exactly 16 years. This was the exact timeline of my absolute darkest memory. I highlighted a specific wire transfer receipt dated 3 days after my grandmother passed away. It showed the total liquidation of her estate, a massive sum legally willed entirely to me for my college education and future security. The transfer destination was not a gambling debt or a failed real estate venture, like Richard always claimed. I pulled up the corresponding property deed filed in the same folder. The stolen funds were used to purchase a luxury penthouse condo in downtown Chicago, registered exclusively under Madison's name. She was 19 at the time. I sat paralyzed in the glow of the monitor, the sheer magnitude of their cruelty washing over me. They had not drained my accounts to save the family from financial ruin. They had stolen my entire future solely to elevate Madison's lifestyle. I opened the attached communication logs, finding emails exchanged between Richard and Patricia from that exact week. "We will tell everyone Sienna suffered a mental breakdown and ran away with the money," Patricia had written to Richard. "The narrative is perfect. The police will classify her as a troubled runaway, and Madison gets the property she deserves." They had perfectly framed me as a degenerate criminal addict to completely cover their tracks, sacrificing my reputation and sanity to secure a luxury condo for the golden child. The audacity of their deception ignited a fire inside my chest that burned away any lingering trace of familial obligation. I was not just looking at a family betrayal anymore. I was looking at decades of systemic, calculated, and deeply illegal financial manipulation. "David," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "pull the geographic routing data for the domestic wire transfers they used to funnel the stolen estate money and the Thornton funds into Madison's accounts. I need to see the exact banking channels they utilized." David executed the command, projecting a digital map across the central viewing screen. The transaction lines illuminated in bright crimson, zigzagging across the map. The stolen capital had been routed from accounts in Illinois, pushed through holding companies in Nevada and Delaware, before finally settling into Madison's offshore accounts in Miami. "They did not just steal from me and Kendrick," I stated, staring at the undeniable visual evidence of their crimes. "They crossed multiple state lines utilizing electronic banking channels to execute these fraudulent transfers." David looked up from his console, his eyes widening as he realized the exact legal implication of my words. "Interstate wire fraud." He confirmed, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I nodded, a feeling of chilling certainty settling over me. The IRS subpoena was going to be the least of their problems. By crossing state lines with stolen corporate and private capital, they had escalated their little family con game into a major federal crime. The digital security protocols we integrated into our monitoring software were legally mandated to respond to this specific level of criminality. I watched the upper right corner of the primary monitor as a red notification icon began to flash rhythmically. The automated security trigger had engaged. The FBI was now automatically flagged. The automated security trigger blared on my primary monitor, but before I could instruct David on our coordination with the federal authorities, a sharp, frantic pounding echoed from my apartment's front door. I had returned home briefly to gather physical files, leaving my legal team to manage the corporate fallout. I approached the entryway, checking the security feed on my smart panel. It was Kendrick. He was not wearing his pristine white coat or his perfectly tailored suits. He stood in the hallway wearing a wrinkled gray sweater, his shoulders slumped, clutching a thick stack of crumpled papers against his chest. I disengaged the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. The brilliant, confident orthopedic surgeon I had spoken to just days ago was entirely gone. He looked completely shattered. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by deep, bruised shadows that spoke of absolute exhaustion and profound betrayal. "Sienna," he rasped, his voice cracking as he stepped into my foyer without waiting for an invitation. He held up the stack of papers, his hands trembling violently. "These are my credit card statements, the ones tied to our joint accounts and the family trust. Every single transaction was completely denied this morning. I closed the door, locking it securely behind him, and remained perfectly silent, allowing him to process the nightmare aloud. My mother called me last night after the gala. He continued pacing my hardwood floor with frantic, unfocused energy. She told me everything that happened in the hallway. She ordered me to initiate a deep dive into our joint accounts immediately. I spent the entire night on the phone with my private bankers in Zurich. There is absolutely nothing left, Sienna. The trust is completely drained. Liquid assets are gone. The reserve accounts are overdrawn by hundreds of thousands. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, a desperate, broken look in his eyes. Madison called me an hour ago from a blocked number. She was hysterical. She swore to me that you did this. She said you hacked into our personal banking network, stole our entire life savings, and framed her out of some twisted, lifelong jealousy. She begged me to call the police and have you arrested for digital theft. I looked at this honorable, decent man, feeling a surge of disgust for my sister that defied human measurement. Madison was perfectly willing to destroy my freedom. She wanted me locked in a federal prison cell just to buy herself a few more days of plausible deniability. I did not raise my voice, and I did not act defensive. Come into the living room. Kendrick, I instructed, gently guiding him toward the large leather sectional facing my home workspace. Sit down before you collapse. I walked over to the mahogany bar cart and poured 2 fingers of aged bourbon into a crystal glass. I handed it to him. Drink this, I said. You are going to need it to process what I am about to show you. Kendrick took the glass, downing the dark liquid in one swift motion. I sat next to him and pulled my primary laptop from the coffee table, flipping the screen around so it directly faced him. I am not going to ask you to believe my word against your wife, I stated, bringing up the decrypted financial logs David and I just extracted. I am going to show you the undeniable mathematical truth. Data does not lie. Kendrick, and it certainly does not manipulate its victims. I tapped the keyboard, expanding the detailed ledger of the Thornton Medical Trust. These are the exact routing numbers attached to your generational wealth fund, I explained, dragging the cursor across the screen to highlight the massive outbound transfers. Look closely at the destination coordinates. The money did not go into my corporate accounts. It did not bounce into a random digital wallet. It was systematically funneled through a series of highly sophisticated dummy corporations. I initiated the final decryption sequence, revealing the ultimate beneficiaries of the shell companies. The screen flashed, displaying the official incorporation documents. Kendrick leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat as he read the bold black text. The primary beneficiary receiving every single dollar of your family legacy is a commercial entity called Apex Real Estate Holdings, I said, watching his eyes widen in pure horror. The sole proprietor of Apex is Richard Wilson, my father. Madison did not just drain your accounts. She funneled your entire generational fortune directly into Richard's failing commercial real estate firm to bail him out of massive corporate debt. They used you, Kendrick. They looked at your pristine reputation and your family money, and they saw nothing but a massive, unsuspecting piggy bank. Kendrick stared at the screen for a very long time. He did not scream, and he did not throw the crystal glass against the wall. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calm washed over him. The frantic, broken husband vanished instantly, replaced by the top-tier, highly disciplined surgeon who regularly operated on shattered spines under immense pressure. He placed the empty glass onto the coffee table with a soft, precise click. His posture straightened, his jaw locking into a rigid line of pure clinical focus. He methodically buttoned his wrinkled gray sweater, his eyes never leaving the digital proof of his wife's unforgivable betrayal. When is your family's annual Thanksgiving dinner? He asked the question with a quiet, lethal precision that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. I closed the laptop, meeting his cold, unblinking gaze. It is tomorrow night, I replied. Patricia insists on hosting it at exactly 7 o'clock in the main dining room of their suburban estate. She demands perfect attendance to maintain her flawless public image. Kendrick stood up, adjusting his cuffs with the exact same deliberate, measured movements he used before walking into a sterile operating theater. "Good," he said, his voice entirely stripped of emotion. "I am going to perform an amputation." The following evening, the biting November cold whipped through the bare trees lining my exclusive suburban street. The sweeping driveway of Patricia and Richard was packed with luxury vehicles. Soft, warm light spilled from the massive bay windows, casting a golden glow over the meticulously manicured lawn. From the outside, it was the absolute picture of American perfection. A wealthy family gathering to give thanks, surrounded by crystal silver and the intoxicating aroma of roasted turkey and sage stuffing. Inside, I knew they were performing their favorite play. Richard would be pouring expensive scotch, bragging about real estate ventures that were actually funded by stolen capital. Patricia would be directing the catering staff she hired to pretend she cooked the meal herself. And Madison would be playing the role of the perfect devoted wife, clinging to Kendrick and acting like the victim of a vicious cyber attack orchestrated by her jealous, estranged sister. They were showing off for Kendrick, entirely unaware that the man sitting in their opulent living room was no longer the unsuspecting Mark they had so easily manipulated for years. Kendrick had spent the entire day reviewing the decrypted financial logs David and I provided. He knew every single detail. He knew about the dummy corporations, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, and the total liquidation of my estate. He had mapped out the entire anatomy of their deception with the cold, calculating precision of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal disease. I walked up the wide brick steps, making absolutely no sound against the heavy frost. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I simply turned the brass knob and pushed the heavy oak door open, stepping into the expansive marble foyer. The immediate sound of clinking glasses and boisterous laughter echoing from the formal dining room came to an abrupt, screeching halt. Patricia was the first to appear in the hallway, carrying a heavy silver tray of expensive champagne flutes. Her perfect, practiced hostess smile vanished the second her eyes locked onto mine. She nearly dropped the tray, the crystal glasses clattering dangerously against each other. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She positioned herself squarely in my path, physically blocking the entrance to the main living area. "You have some nerve showing up here, you cyber criminal," Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with venom, though she kept it low enough to avoid echoing into the dining room. "Get out of my house this instant before I call the police and have you dragged out in handcuffs. You are completely deranged, Sienna. How dare you hack into your accounts and steal her money?" I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply stared at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. Before I could even formulate a response, heavy footsteps sounded from the dining room. Kendrick materialized in the hallway, his face an unreadable stony mask. He walked with slow, deliberate steps until he was standing directly behind my right shoulder. "I invited her," Patricia Kendrick stated, his voice ringing with the cold, terrifying authority that left absolutely no room for debate. "Let her in." Patricia literally stumbled backward, her mouth falling open in complete shock. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face. She looked frantically from Kendrick to me, her mind clearly trying to comprehend why her wealthy, allegedly victimized son-in-law was suddenly acting as my personal escort. She clutched the silver tray to her chest, her knuckles turning white, and silently stepped aside. I walked past her, my boots echoing against the hardwood as I moved into the formal dining room. The space was overwhelmingly opulent. A crystal chandelier hung over a mahogany table set for 20, despite there being a handful of people present. The table groaned under the weight of silver platters piled high with expensive catered food. Richard sat at the head of the table, a crystal glass of amber liquid gripped tightly in his right hand. He froze halfway through a sip, his eyes widening as I stepped into the light. Madison was seated to his right, wearing a cashmere sweater and a diamond tennis bracelet purchased with stolen money. She dropped her silver fork onto her china plate with a sharp, piercing clatter. The manufactured atmosphere of family joy evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating tension. "What is she doing here?" Richard demanded, his voice booming across the room as he stood up, his chest puffing out in an immediate display of false alpha male bravado. "I told security specifically not to grant her access at the front gate." Kendrick pulled out a heavy wooden chair at the middle of the table and gestured for me to sit. I sat down smoothly, ignoring his manufactured outrage. Kendrick took the seat directly next to me, crossing his arms and fixing his unblinking gaze entirely on his wife. Madison immediately recognized the tectonic shift in the power dynamic. Her survival instincts kicked in, and she instantly deployed her most effective weapon. Her lower lip began to tremble. Large, glistening tears welled up in her bright blue eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "Kendrick, how could you bring her here?" Madison cried, her voice hitching with perfectly executed theatrical sobs. She looked around the table, desperately seeking the validation she had always received. "She stole everything from us. She hacked our accounts and ruined our lives out of pure, bitter jealousy. She is a criminal, and she is completely ruining our family holiday." Patricia rushed into the room, hovering anxiously behind her chair, placing a comforting hand on her golden shoulder. I calmly reached across the table, picked up a heavy silver fork, speared a thick slice of perfectly roasted turkey from the main serving platter, and smiled directly into Madison's panic-stricken eyes. "I have not even started ruining things yet, Madison." The crystal chandelier cast a harsh, unforgiving glare over the sprawling mahogany table. The tension in the dining room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing against everyone's lungs. Richard, entirely oblivious to the lethal current running beneath the surface of my words, decided to reclaim his manufactured alpha status. He was not about to let his estranged, discarded daughter ruin his flawless Thanksgiving performance in front of his wealthy son-in-law. He puffed out his chest, picked up his heavy crystal tumbler filled with expensive aged scotch, and tapped a silver spoon against the rim. The sharp, high-pitched ringing sliced through the heavy silence. "I want to propose a toast," Richard announced, his booming voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. He raised his glass toward Madison, his eyes shining with profound, fabricated pride. "To my brilliant daughter Madison and her spectacularly booming startup. You have shown incredible business acumen this year, sweetheart. You took a vision and transformed it into a medical empire. We are all incredibly proud of the woman you have become." Madison instantly stopped her theatrical sobbing. She wiped a perfectly manicured finger beneath her eye, ensuring she did not smudge her mascara, and offered her father a radiant, practiced smile. She reached out and placed her hand over Kendrick's arm, attempting to project the image of a perfectly unified power couple. "Thank you, Daddy," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I could not have built the Madison Wellness platform without the unwavering support of my amazing husband." Richard turned his beaming, predatory gaze directly onto Kendrick. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The predatory shark was moving in for the kill, completely blind to the fact that he was swimming straight into a cage. "Speaking of your amazing husband," Richard continued, his tone shifting into smooth, transactional confidence. "Kendrick, my boy, Madison mentioned that the expansion phase requires a bit more capital infusion to finalize the offshore acquisitions. When exactly should we expect the next round of trust fund money to clear?" Patricia nodded enthusiastically from her seat, her eyes gleaming with undisguised greed. "Yes, Kendrick, the international vendors are being quite pushy about the transfer timeline." Kendrick did not immediately respond. He sat with terrifying absolute stillness. He did not look at Richard, and he did not look at Patricia. He slowly pulled his arm away, letting Madison's hand drop awkwardly onto the white linen tablecloth. He reached forward and picked up his heavy silver fork. The silence stretched, becoming thick and unbearable. He methodically aligned the fork parallel to his silver knife, measuring the distance with the exact precision of a surgeon preparing to make a critical, life-altering incision. He gently placed the fork down. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "It won't," Richard Kendrick stated, his voice completely devoid of any human emotion. Richard's smug smile faltered, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "Excuse me?" Richard asked, leaning forward slightly. I do not think I heard you correctly, son. I said it will not clear. Kendrick repeated, lifting his gaze to meet Richard's eyes with a look of absolute freezing hostility. The next round of funding is not arriving tomorrow. It is not arriving next week. It is never arriving. Because I filed a comprehensive irrevocable freeze on all financial assets and trust accounts at precisely 8 o'clock this morning. The air vanished from the room. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat as the color drained entirely from her face. Richard slowly lowered his Scotch glass, his jaw clenching as he tried to process the catastrophic failure of his entire financial lifeline. "What are you talking about?" Madison shrieked, the sweet, loving wife persona, evaporating in a flash of raw, unfiltered panic. "You cannot do that. The platform needs that capital. We have binding contracts. We have vendor obligations. You are ruining my business." Kendrick finally turned to look at the woman he married. His expression was a horrifying mask of pure clinical detachment. "You do not have a business, Madison," he said quietly. "You have a criminal enterprise." The reality of her total destruction finally shattered Madison's manufactured composure. She went into a full, explosive, manic meltdown. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson. Her chest heaved with ragged, furious breaths as she lost whatever remaining shred of self-control she possessed. "This is your fault!" Madison screamed, her voice breaking into a guttural shriek as she lunged across the table. She grabbed her half-empty wine glass and hurled it directly at my head with all of her strength. The heavy crystal missed my face by inches, smashing violently against the stone fireplace behind me. Dark red wine splattered across the pristine white walls like fresh blood. "You poisoned his mind," Madison roared. "You are a disgusting, manipulative liar. You ugly, jealous freak." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up the thick, heavy dossier David and I had printed from our secure servers earlier that afternoon. I placed the dossier flat onto the mahogany table. I placed my palm on top of the black leather cover and slid it smoothly across the polished surface. It glided past the silver centerpieces and came to a perfect stop directly in front of my sister's empty plate. Jealous of what I asked, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the absolute chaos of the room. "Your 5 counts of felony embezzlement." Richard stared at the black dossier, his eyes suddenly wide and entirely unblinking. The aggressive, dominant, arrogant patriarch was now completely gone. His breathing became incredibly shallow, coming in rapid, ragged, desperate gasps. He clutched his chest, his knuckles turning stark white as he desperately choked for air. He collapsed heavily to the floor, breathing rapidly and heavily. Patricia screamed that I had just killed my own father. The ambulance siren faded into the background noise of the emergency room receiving bay. I followed the stretcher through the sliding glass doors, keeping a measured distance from the medical personnel swarming around my father. The sheer theatricality of his collapse was entirely consistent with his character. When cornered by his own actions, Richard always sought an escape hatch. Kendrick walked beside me, his stride perfectly synchronized with the chaotic tempo of the corridor. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at the frantic mother-in-law trailing behind the paramedics. He watched the monitors tracking Richard's heart rate with the detached precision of a seasoned trauma surgeon. We were directed into a harsh, fluorescent-lit waiting area designated for the families of critical care patients. The room smelled of industrial bleach and stale coffee. Madison collapsed into a plastic chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly enough to draw the attention of the nurses stationed at the front desk. She was playing to an audience that no longer cared. Kendrick remained standing by the double doors, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes devoid of sympathy. I took a seat near the window, staring out into the freezing November night. The glass reflected the absolute wreckage of my biological family. I felt no guilt. The dossier sitting on their dining table contained nothing but their own choices. They built their empire on fraud, and I simply handed them the bill. The ticking of the wall clock above the reception desk marked each agonizing second. Security personnel occasionally glanced in our direction, their expressions trained to remain neutral, despite the palpable hostility radiating from my mother. The entire emergency department seemed to hold its collective breath, anticipating the inevitable eruption. Every time the heavy pneumatic doors swung open, Patricia would tense her breathing, turning shallow, only to deflate when it was just another passing night shift trauma nurse. Patricia paced the length of the waiting room, her designer heels clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. Her pristine holiday dress was wrinkled, her perfect hair was slightly disheveled. She kept glancing at the swinging doors leading to the trauma bay, her hands wringing together in a display of manufactured agony. When 10 minutes passed without an update, she suddenly stopped pacing, her eyes locked onto me, blazing with a terrifying, unfiltered hatred. She marched across the room, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. Before I could even stand up or raise my hands to defend myself, Patricia swung her arm back and delivered a vicious, stinging slap across my left cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the quiet waiting room, silencing Madison's theatrical crying instantly. Several people in the adjacent chairs gasped, turning their heads away in uncomfortable shock. Patricia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face, ignoring the security guard. "If he dies, it's on you. You sign over your company to your sister right now to fix this financial mess, or you're dead to us." The sting radiated across my jawline, burning hot against my cold skin. I did not raise a hand to rub the welt forming on my cheek. I did not break eye contact. I remained seated, looking up at the woman who brought me into this world, feeling absolutely nothing but profound clarity. I slowly touched my cheek, my fingers tracing the outline of her furious strike, remaining completely unfazed by her desperate display of violence. "You slapped me just like that when I was 17, just because I asked why my birthday cake was in the trash. I survived it, then I'll survive it now." I stood up slowly, forcing her to take a physical step backward to maintain her balance. "The difference between then and now is that I no longer need your permission to exist. I no longer require your conditional love to feel valued. You just demanded that I surrender my entire corporate entity to subsidize your criminal behavior. You actually believe a slap and a threat will force me to fund your fraudulent lifestyle. You are not protecting a family legacy. You are trying to salvage a sinking criminal enterprise." Madison scrambled out of her chair, rushing to stand behind our mother like a frightened child. "Mom is right," Madison yelled, her voice thick with panic. "You have to fix this, Sienna." Kendrick froze the accounts. "The vendors are going to sue us. The federal regulators are going to audit the trust by Monday morning. If you do not give us the capital to cover the offshore transfers, we are all going to federal prison. You owe us. You are part of this family." Kendrick stepped forward, his presence immediately silencing my sister. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer weight of his clinical authority was enough to crush the remaining oxygen from the room. "She owes you absolutely nothing," Madison Kendrick said, looking at his wife as if she were a complete stranger. "You orchestrated a massive financial crime, blamed it on your sister, and expected me to fund your lifestyle indefinitely. You are going to face the federal authorities entirely on your own. My lawyers are drafting the divorce papers right now. I will not be tethered to a convicted felon." Patricia opened her mouth to scream another defense, but the heavy double doors of the trauma unit swung open. A tall emergency room doctor, wearing green scrubs and a stethoscope draped around his neck, stepped into the waiting area. The room's tension pivoted toward him. Patricia lunged forward, grabbing the doctor's forearm with desperate, grasping hands. "Please tell me my husband is alive," Patricia cried. "Please tell me her vicious attack did not stop his heart." The doctor looked at Patricia with disgust. "Your husband is fine. It was a mild panic attack, mostly induced by stress. He's already awake and asking his lawyer to shred some documents." The emergency room doctor's words hung in the air, completely obliterating the theatrical tragedy my family had just tried to stage. A faked panic attack. Richard was hiding in a hospital bed, pretending to be on the brink of death just to escape the financial guillotine I had dropped onto his dining room table. I watched the realization wash over Patricia. Her manicured hand fell away from the doctor's arm. The domineering matriarch who had slapped me just moments ago suddenly looked incredibly small. Her face flushed with a deep, humiliating shade of crimson as the few remaining people in the waiting room stared at her with open disgust. Kendrick did not say a single word. He adjusted his coat, gave the doctor a brief nod of acknowledgement, and turned on his heel. He walked out of the sliding glass doors, leaving his hysterical wife and humiliated mother-in-law standing alone in the harsh fluorescent light. Madison tried to run after him, but the automatic doors clamped shut before she could reach the sidewalk. I looked at Patricia one last time. I touched my cheek again, feeling the faint, lingering heat of her slap, and offered her a tight, polite smile. I walked out of the hospital, the freezing November air feeling incredibly refreshing against my skin. The performance was over. It was time to finalize the destruction of their empire. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the trap completely closed. I sat in a sleek glass-walled conference room in downtown Chicago, flanked by David and three of the most ruthless corporate litigators in the city. Kendrick sat at the head of the long oak table, looking like a man who had finally excised a tumor from his life. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out the finalized, officially notarized cyber forensic report. It was a masterpiece of digital tracking. David and I had spent the entire night tracing every single unauthorized transfer, mapping the exact digital footprints Madison had left when she drained the trust accounts and funneled the capital into Richard's failing commercial real estate firm. I slid the heavy binder across the table toward Kendrick's lead attorney. "Data does not recognize family loyalty," I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "This report contains undeniable proof of wire fraud, identity theft, and 5 counts of felony embezzlement. The IP addresses used to authorize the transfers match the secure network at my sister's wellness startup. The destination accounts are all registered under shell companies owned entirely by Richard. They used my encrypted credentials to frame me, hoping my estrangement would make me the perfect scapegoat." The lead attorney opened the binder, his eyes scanning the meticulously organized financial logs. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He looked up at Kendrick and nodded. "We have enough here to secure federal indictments by the end of the week," the attorney confirmed. "We will seize the assets of the wellness platform immediately, and we will initiate civil proceedings against Richard to recover the stolen trust funds. They are completely boxed in. There is absolutely no legal maneuver that can save them from this level of documentation." I leaned back, feeling a profound sense of closure. I had not just cleared my name, I had permanently dismantled the weapon they used to terrorize people. The fallout was swift and absolute. News of the impending indictments leaked to the financial press by late Tuesday afternoon. The dummy corporations crumbled. The vendors pulled their contracts. The investors surrounding Madison's fraudulent wellness platform vanished into thin air. I was sitting in my apartment watching the city lights flicker to life when my cell phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before pressing the green icon and lifting the phone to my ear. I did not say hello, I simply waited. "Sienna, please," Patricia begged, her voice entirely stripped of its usual venom. There was no screaming. There were no demands. There was only the raw, pathetic sound of a woman realizing her entire world was collapsing. She sounded frantic, breathless, and completely broken. The tone shift was jarring. The woman who had slapped me in a hospital waiting room less than 48 hours ago was now weeping into the receiver. "You have to stop this!" Patricia cried, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. "Richard is facing federal charges. The banks are foreclosing on the house. Kendrick's lawyers froze all of Madison's accounts, and they are coming after my personal assets to recoup the trust funds. Sienna, please, I am begging you. We are your parents. Madison is your sister. You cannot do this to your own blood. You cannot let Kendrick take everything from us. If you do not retract that forensic report and take the blame, we will be completely ruined. We will be homeless." I listened to her frantic, hyperventilating pleas, feeling absolutely nothing. I looked around my quiet, safe apartment. I thought about the years I spent believing I was the problem. I thought about the isolation, the gaslighting, and the constant suffocating pressure of trying to earn the love of people who only saw me as a convenient scapegoat. They had built their entire lives on my suffering, and now they expected me to sacrifice my freedom to shield them from the consequences of their own spectacular greed. I took a slow, deep breath. letting the silence stretch across the line to ensure she felt the full weight of my response. "You made me homeless at 17. I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that commanded absolute attention. "The streets of Chicago are cold, Mom. Better buy a warm coat." I lowered the heavy phone and pressed the red button, cutting off her hysterical sobbing instantly. I blocked her number, tossed the device onto the cold granite counter, and walked away for good. By Saturday morning, the digital tripwires David and I planted across Madison's personal devices began blaring with frantic activity, with Kendrick's legal team freezing her legitimate assets and his mother, Judge Thornton, preparing to launch a federal audit of the trust accounts on Monday morning. Madison was completely out of options. She had 48 hours to miraculously replace $2 million. If the ledger showed a zero balance when the judge's forensic accountants opened the books, Madison would be trading her cashmere for an orange jumpsuit. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee, watching my secondary monitor scroll through her increasingly desperate text messages. She exhausted her network of wealthy friends. No one was willing to catch a falling knife, especially one covered in federal fraud charges. Panic breeds stupidity, and my sister was panicking beautifully. By noon, she reached out to a shadow financial group operating out of the South Loop. They were high-end loan sharks who catered to desperate executives, charging exorbitant interest rates and enforcing repayment with methods that did not involve court orders. Madison was trying to secure a bridge loan to cover the stolen trust funds, planning to claim the missing money was a temporary clerical delay. She arranged to meet them at 3 o'clock in the lobby of the Continental Hotel. I called David, instructing him to liquidate a portion of my offshore investment returns. I did not just want to stop my sister from getting the money, I wanted to trap her. I dressed in a sharp black suit, grabbed the heavy aluminum briefcase David sent via courier, and ordered a car to the Continental. The hotel lobby was a masterpiece of Art Deco architecture, filled with towering marble columns and the hum of wealthy patrons ignoring each other. I spotted Madison immediately. She sat rigidly in a corner booth near the back, wearing dark sunglasses indoors, clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver. Two men sat across from her. They wore expensive suits, but their posture lacked refinement. They were dangerous men, and Madison was visibly shaking as she signed her name on a thick stack of promissory notes. She was promising them collateral she no longer owned, leveraging Richard's frozen commercial properties to guarantee the $2 million. It was a spectacular display of reckless arrogance. I walked across the carpet, my heels completely silent against the thick fabric. The men noticed me first, their eyes narrowing as they assessed the threat level. Madison followed their gaze. She pulled off her sunglasses, her bloodshot eyes widening in absolute horror as I approached their secluded table. "What are you doing here?" Madison hissed, her voice trembling. She instinctively placed her hands over the documents, trying to shield them from my view. "Leave right now, Sienna. This is a private business meeting." I ignored her entirely, focusing my attention on the two men sitting across the table. They looked at me with cold, calculating expressions, their hands resting flat against the polished wood. "She is lying to you," I stated calmly, my voice projecting unwavering authority. The commercial real estate portfolio she listed as collateral for this bridge loan was seized by federal litigators yesterday afternoon. Her husband froze all of her liquid assets, and her startup is currently under criminal investigation for felony embezzlement. If you wire $2 million into her account, the federal government will freeze it within an hour, and you will never see a single cent of it returned. The man on the left raised a dark eyebrow. He looked from me to Madison, watching the color drain completely from her face. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly threat. "She is crazy," Madison stammered, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "She is a jealous, vindictive liar. The assets are perfectly clean. I just need the bridge loan until Monday. Please, you have to push the wire transfer through right now." I did not argue or raise my voice to defend my claim. I simply lifted the heavy aluminum briefcase and dropped it onto the center of the table. The sudden thud rattled the crystal water glasses. I spun the combination dials, popped the dual latches, and flipped the lid open. Stacks of pristine banded $100 bills filled the interior. It was exactly $250,000 in untraceable clean cash. This is for your time and for the inconvenience of dealing with a fraudulent client, I told the men, maintaining absolute eye contact. Take the cash, walk out of this hotel, and completely delete Madison Thornton from your contact list. If you proceed with her loan, you are buying a federal indictment. If you take this briefcase, you walk away significantly richer and completely clean. The two men did not need to deliberate. They understood risk assessment better than any corporate board. The senior partner pulled the promissory notes from beneath Madison's trembling hands. He ripped the documents in half, dropped the pieces onto the table, and snapped the briefcase shut. He picked it up, gave me a brief, respectful nod, and stood up. "Do not ever contact us again," he told Madison, his tone calm. They turned and walked out of the lobby, dissolving into the crowd. Madison sat frozen, her mouth opening and closing silently, as the absolute reality of her situation crushed her. Her final escape route had just evaporated before her eyes. She was completely cornered. She looked up at me, her face a portrait of pure terror. "Why did you do that?" She choked out, her voice a broken whisper. "You just paid them to walk away. You spent your own money. Why?" I placed both of my hands on the table, leaning forward until my face was inches from hers. I looked into the eyes of the woman who had spent my entire life ensuring I had absolutely nothing. "You owe me now," I said, "and I don't forgive debts." I left Madison trembling in the hotel lobby, her designer sunglasses lying discarded next to the torn promissory notes. She was a woman who had finally run out of runway, staring down the barrel of a federal audit she could no longer escape. I walked out into the crisp afternoon air, sliding the empty aluminum briefcase into the back of my waiting car. The first domino had officially fallen, but the main event was still 48 hours away. Richard was desperate, bleeding capital and fighting a multi-front war against Kendrick's litigators and the rapidly approaching federal authorities. His only remaining survival strategy was a fire sale. He needed to liquidate his entire commercial real estate firm before the indictments hit the public record. He arranged a massive high-stakes board meeting for Thursday morning, inviting 3 distinct private equity groups to bid on his supposedly pristine portfolio. He intended to take the cash, dissolve the corporate entity, and disappear to a non-extradition country before the weekend. What Richard failed to realize was that modern acquisitions require extensive cyber forensic due diligence. The buying group had hired an independent tech consultancy firm to verify the digital integrity of Richard's assets. I owned that consultancy firm. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy downpour that washed the Chicago skyline in shades of slate and gray. I rode the private elevator up to the penthouse level of Richard's corporate headquarters. The boardroom was an opulent display of manufactured wealth, featuring a massive mahogany table, leather executive chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Richard stood at the head of the table, projecting an aura of absolute confidence. He wore a bespoke navy suit, his posture relaxed, his smile completely practiced. He was charming the representatives from the Vanguard Acquisition Group, pouring them sparkling water and directing their attention to glossy, expertly forged financial prospectuses. He was selling them a ghost ship, padding the structural deficits with the capital Madison had stolen from the trust. It was a brilliant, highly illegal facade. The Vanguard executives looked impressed, nodding along as Richard outlined the projected quarter-over-quarter growth. The lead buyer, a sharp-featured woman named Victoria, checked her watch and announced it was time to review the digital infrastructure report. Richard smiled magnanimously and gestured toward the double oak doors. He expected a faceless corporate drone to walk in and rubber stamp his fraudulent ledgers. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the room. The transition in Richard's face was spectacular. His practiced smile shattered instantly, replaced by a mask of profound, unfiltered panic. The color completely drained from his cheeks. His hand gripping a crystal water pitcher began to shake so violently that ice clinked against the glass. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sheer shock rendered him entirely mute. Victoria stood up and gestured toward me. "This is our lead independent cybersecurity consultant," she announced to the room. Her team has spent the last 72 hours running a deep dive forensic analysis on the digital assets and server infrastructure of your firm. I walked calmly to the front of the room, taking my place directly beside the massive digital projection screen. I did not look at Richard. I plugged my encrypted drive into the console and tapped the podium. The heavy motorized blinds immediately descended over the windows, plunging the boardroom into a dramatic, cinematic darkness. The projector hummed to life, casting a bright, harsh light across the far wall. Richard finally found his voice, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Stop this presentation right now!" he commanded, his tone frantic and shrill. Victoria turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Is there a problem with the digital audit, Richard?" he stammered, looking wildly between Victoria and me. "This woman is estranged family. She is a disgruntled relative trying to sabotage a legitimate business transaction." Victoria crossed her arms, completely unmoved by his outburst. "The numbers are either verified or they are not. Proceed with the audit." I pressed a single key on my laptop. The screen flashed, displaying a complex, interconnected web of offshore shell companies, dummy vendor accounts, and fraudulent wire transfers. The glossy prospectuses sitting on the table in front of the buyers were suddenly rendered utterly meaningless. "What you are looking at is not a profitable commercial real estate portfolio," I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the darkened room. "You are looking at a massive, bleeding deficit temporarily propped up by $2 million in stolen trust funds. The assets listed in your acquisition packets are currently frozen by federal litigators. The capital injections shown in Q3 are the direct result of felony embezzlement. If you acquire this corporate entity, you are acquiring a mountain of federal fraud charges and assuming total liability for the stolen funds." The entire boardroom descended into absolute silence. Victoria stared at the screen, her eyes wide as the staggering magnitude of the deception registered. She slowly closed the glossy prospectus folder sitting in front of her. Richard scrambled toward the table, his voice cracking in desperate panic. "Victoria, please, you must understand," he pleaded, waving his trembling hands. "These figures are entirely fabricated. I can explain everything. We can renegotiate the terms right now." Victoria did not even look at him. She picked up her leather briefcase and signaled her team. "This meeting is completely over," she announced with icy finality. The Vanguard executives gathered their belongings in swift, synchronized movements. They marched out of the double oak doors without glancing back, leaving the fraudulent documents abandoned on the mahogany table. Richard lunged toward the doorway, but they were already gone. He slowly turned to face me. His shoulders slumped, his breathing shallow and ragged. I gently closed my laptop, severing the projector feed. The bright light vanished instantly. I walked out, leaving Richard sitting completely alone in the dark boardroom, quietly waiting for the inevitable federal sirens to finally arrive. The fallout from Richard's boardroom humiliation had barely settled before Kendrick delivered the final blow to Madison's crumbling reality. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning in the expansive foyer of the luxury medical clinic Kendrick owned and operated. Madison marched through the sliding glass doors, wearing a perfectly tailored designer coat, looking every bit the entitled surgeon's wife she desperately still believed herself to be. She bypassed the reception desk entirely, ignoring the frantic protests of the clinical staff, and threw open the heavy oak door to Kendrick's private office. He was not alone. Kendrick stood beside his lead divorce attorney, a sharp, unyielding man with an incredibly stern demeanor, holding a thick manila envelope. Madison froze in place, her demanding expression completely faltering as Kendrick slid the envelope across the surface of his mahogany desk. He informed her that these were the finalized divorce papers and she had exactly 24 hours to sign them. Madison stared at the printed documents as if they were venomous. The shock quickly mutated into a blinding, self-righteous fury. She flatly refused to pick up a pen. She crossed her arms, her voice echoing down the sterile clinic corridor, and declared she was unconditionally entitled to half of his entire medical practice, his investment portfolios, and his generational family wealth. She reminded Kendrick that they had built their life together, and she would drag him through years of brutal public litigation before she walked away with absolutely nothing. Kendrick did not flinch. He calmly informed her that she was walking away with exactly what she brought into the marriage, which was absolutely nothing but deceit. He turned back to his patient files, completely dismissing her presence entirely. Madison stormed out of the building, promising a devastating legal bloodbath. 3 weeks later, that promised bloodbath materialized in the form of a high-stakes legal deposition at a prestigious downtown law firm. The large conference room was a cold, sterile, intimidating space, constructed of frosted glass and polished steel. Madison sat beside her hired pit bull of a lawyer, a man named Sterling, who radiated unwarranted aggressive arrogance. He wore a custom pinstripe suit and smiled with the condescending ease of a man who thought he held all the winning cards. Kendrick sat directly opposite them, maintaining his clinical, detached composure. Sterling opened the proceedings by laying out Madison's aggressive financial demands. He stated that his client had sacrificed her own earning potential to support her husband's medical career and demanded exorbitant spousal support that mirrored her accustomed lavish lifestyle. Sterling dismissed Kendrick's claims of financial misconduct as baseless, vindictive slander, arguing that any issues with the trust fund were entirely separate from the marital assets. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and confidently challenged Kendrick's legal team to prove that Madison had ever intentionally jeopardized their shared marital estate. It was a bold, remarkably foolish dare. Kendrick's lawyer simply nodded in response and silently opened the heavy boardroom door. I walked into the deposition room wearing a sharp charcoal suit, carrying my encrypted laptop. Madison's smug expression instantly vanished immediately, replaced by a look of profound visceral panic. Sterling scoffed aloud, asking the official court reporter to note his vehement objection to my presence, labeling me a disgruntled, estranged sibling with absolutely no legal standing. Kendrick's attorney smoothly entered my credentials into the official legal record. I was not there as a sister. I was there as a court-appointed independent cybersecurity expert specifically tasked with verifying the digital trail of the disputed funds. I took my seat at the head of the long table, connected my laptop to the presentation monitor, and launched the digital forensic mapping I had meticulously compiled over the past week. The screen illuminated with a complex network of financial transactions, IP logs, and encrypted communications. I did not waste time with basic pleasantries. I systematically walked the entire room through Madison's precise digital footprint. I showed exactly how she had bypassed the strict security protocols on Kendrick's personal banking accounts, diverting substantial sums of his inherited wealth to cover the initial losses in Richard's failing real estate firm long before she ever touched the trust fund. Sterling tried to interrupt the presentation loudly, objecting to the data as circumstantial. I silenced him by projecting a series of highly encrypted text messages and forged digital signatures onto the screen. The data displayed on the screen was undeniable and mathematically precise. I highlighted a specific sequence of wire transfers executed from Kendrick's private accounts, complete with geolocation tags placing the initiating device directly inside Madison's wellness startup headquarters. She had not just stolen from the family trust. She had been systematically siphoning money from her husband's private generational wealth for over 2 years to hide her business failures. I turned to Sterling, maintaining unwavering eye contact, and explained the legal implications of the evidence. Under United States law, these specific actions constituted deliberate, premeditated marital fraud. Madison had actively hidden massive financial liabilities, forged Kendrick's signature on loan documents, and illegally liquidated his protected assets without his knowledge or consent. This level of documented criminal deception completely voided any prenup and nullified her claim to a single dime of his medical practice properties or future earnings. The room fell into a deathly silence. Sterling stared at the screen, his arrogant smirk wiped away as he realized his client had lied to him, and his case was utterly destroyed. Kendrick looked at Madison with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He finally saw the true depths of her sociopathic greed. Madison's breathing turned shallow and erratic. She looked at the undeniable proof of her crimes glowing on the monitor, then looked at me standing calmly at the head of the table. The facade of the perfect entitled wife shattered. A raw, guttural scream ripped from her throat. She lunged forward, grabbed the heavy metal chair next to her, and hurled it violently across the deposition room. The heavy metal chair slammed against the frosted glass wall, sending a spiderweb of cracks racing across the pristine surface. Madison's guttural scream echoed through the deposition room, a primal sound of absolute defeat. Sterling shrank back into his leather chair, hastily gathering his files. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and his client had just strapped an anchor to her own feet. Kendrick did not flinch at the violent outburst. He calmly adjusted his cuffs, stood up from the table, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. The legal slaughter was complete. Madison had nothing. But Patricia was a creature born of high society survival. Where her daughter saw the end of the world, Patricia saw an urgent public relations crisis that required immediate aggressive spin. The federal indictments were looming, but they had not yet hit the public docket. To Patricia, the only thing worse than federal prison was social exile. 2 days later, she ambushed Kendrick in the private parking garage of his medical clinic. She did not come to negotiate. She came to dictate terms. The 5-year vow renewal gala, a massive opulent event Patricia had been planning for 6 months, was scheduled for that coming Saturday at the Drake Hotel. Madison's sudden financial ruin and impending divorce threatened to turn the high society spectacle into a public humiliation. Patricia stepped directly into Kendrick's path, her eyes narrowed with desperate malice. "You will host that vow renewal?" Patricia demanded, her voice a venomous hiss echoing off the concrete walls. "You will stand at that altar, you will smile at the cameras, and you will pretend this marriage is perfectly intact." Kendrick looked at her with clinical detachment and told her she was completely delusional. Patricia smiled, a cold, calculated expression. "If you cancel that gala," she countered, "I will immediately call the press and the medical board. I will claim you physically and emotionally abused my daughter for years. I will tell them you manipulated her finances to trap her. I will drag your pristine reputation through the mud and ensure your clinic is shuttered before the ink dries on the divorce papers." Kendrick stared at the woman, measuring the genuine lunacy in her threat. A messy public abuse scandal, however baseless, would instantly trigger a board review and jeopardize his surgical license. I stepped out from the shadow of a concrete pillar, having followed Kendrick down from the clinic to review the final asset separation logs. Kendrick locked eyes with me. He saw the cold, calculated certainty in my expression. I gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. He turned back to Patricia, his face an impenetrable mask of compliance. "Have your party," Kendrick stated flatly. He unlocked his car and drove away, leaving Patricia standing in the garage, falsely believing she had just won a war she had already catastrophically lost. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in digital warfare. I sat at my kitchen island, the glow of my monitors reflecting off the dark granite countertops. Patricia wanted a spectacle to preserve her fragile, fraudulent empire. I intended to give her a show that Chicago high society would never forget. I compiled every single piece of evidence into a single, perfectly organized master file. I dragged and dropped the offshore banking receipts, the forged commercial real estate signatures, and the intercepted wire transfers. I included the encrypted communications between Madison and Richard, detailing exactly how they planned to bleed Kendrick dry. I formatted the presentation to execute automatically. No passwords, no firewalls, just a self-executing slide deck of absolute financial ruin. I loaded the entire digital arsenal onto a sleek silver flash drive. It weighed less than an ounce, but it held enough destructive power to obliterate my biological family's entire social and financial existence. I slipped the drive into my evening clutch and turned my attention to my wardrobe. If I was going to be the architect of their final downfall, I was going to look the part. I chose a floor-length emerald green silk gown with sharp architectural lines. It was a dress designed for power, not for blending into the background. I styled my hair in a sleek, immaculate twist and applied a bold, dark red lipstick. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The scared, marginalized girl who had once begged for Patricia's conditional affection was completely gone. The woman looking back was a highly calibrated weapon entirely immune to their manipulation. I grabbed my clutch, stepped out of my apartment, and hailed a car to the Drake Hotel. The grand ballroom was a suffocating display of manufactured perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of Chicago elite. Waiters navigated through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was packed with politicians, hospital board members, and wealthy investors, all completely oblivious to the fact that the hosts were standing on a trapdoor. I walked through the gilded double doors, my emerald dress standing out sharply against the pastel tones of the floral arrangements. The ambient chatter of the room seemed to lower as a few guests turned to look at the unexpected arrival. I took 3 steps into the ballroom before a hand clamped onto my forearm. Patricia stepped squarely into my path, her manicured fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. She wore a heavy diamond necklace that probably belonged to a creditor, and her face was a tight mask of suppressed panic. Her eyes darted around the room, terrified that the wealthy guests might notice the sudden tension. "What are you doing here?" Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing a crowd. "I did not send you an invitation. You are not part of this family. Stay in the back. Do not ruin your sister's night." I smiled. I wouldn't dream of missing her speech. I brushed past Patricia, leaving her sputtering in the foyer. The grand ballroom was a magnificent spectacle of forced opulence. 400 of Chicago's elite figures mingled under the vaulted gold-leafed ceiling. Surgeons board directors and private equity giants sipped vintage champagne, entirely unaware they were attending a high society execution. I moved gracefully through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, securing a perfect vantage point near the sound engineer's staging area. I handed the technician a crisp $100 bill and smoothly inserted my silver flash drive into the primary projection console, cueing the master file. The trap was fully set. I simply needed the guest of honor to step onto the stage. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. A gentle chime echoed over the acoustic system, prompting the massive crowd to quiet down and direct their attention toward the elevated platform at the center of the room. Madison glided up the carpeted stairs, bathing in the brilliant spotlight. She looked absolutely radiant, draped in a custom-beaded couture gown that easily cost $20,000. Every sequin catching the light had been paid for with stolen money. She stepped up to the microphone, her face glowing with a meticulously practiced expression of profound humility and overwhelming joy. She gripped the microphone stand with both hands, allowing a perfectly timed, delicate tear to trace its way down her cheek. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight to celebrate 5 incredible years of marriage." Madison began, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion. "Looking out at this magnificent room, I am completely overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding us. Kendrick and I have built such a beautiful life together. Marriage is not just about the easy days. It is about loyalty. It is about standing by each other through every challenge and celebrating every victory as a united front." She paused, dabbing her eye with a tissue, playing the role of the devoted wife with sickening perfection. She then shifted her focus to her own fabricated accomplishments, seamlessly weaving her business lies into the romantic narrative. "When I launched my wellness startup, many doubted my vision. But Kendrick believed in me. With his unwavering support, my company has grown into a thriving, profitable enterprise that empowers women across the country. I wanted to prove that a woman can be a devoted wife, a pillar of the community, and a highly successful business owner all at once. We are standing here tonight as living proof that true partnership creates limitless potential." She turned toward Kendrick, who stood quietly at the edge of the stage, and extended her hand to him. "Kendrick, you are my rock, my partner, and my entire world. I love you more today than the day we first said our vows." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Women dabbed their eyes. Wealthy executives nodded in solemn respect. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a flawless performance by a woman who had spent the last 2 years systematically robbing the man she was currently praising. Patricia beamed from the front row, looking incredibly smug, convinced her heavy-handed blackmail had successfully saved their social standing. Kendrick stepped onto the stage, moving with the measured grace of a surgeon walking into an operating theater. He took Madison's outstretched hand, gave it a brief formal squeeze, and accepted the microphone. The applause gradually died down, replaced by a hushed, expectant silence. The guests waited eagerly for the loving husband to return the beautiful sentiments. Kendrick did not speak immediately. He stood at the center of the stage, the microphone resting casually in his hand. He looked down at Madison, his expression completely unreadable, stripped of any warmth or affection. He then looked out at the front row, his eyes briefly locking onto his parents, who sat proudly anticipating his speech. Finally, his gaze swept over the crowd and found me standing in the shadows by the tech console. I gave him a single definitive nod. The countdown had reached 0. Kendrick raised the microphone. His voice when he finally spoke was calm, resonant, and utterly devoid of emotion. It cut through the silent ballroom like a scalpel. "Madison, you have certainly taught me a great deal about loyalty tonight," he said, his tone chillingly even. "Specifically, how you have loyally stolen $2.5 million from my family's pediatric charity fund to pay for your father's failing business, and this very dress you are wearing." A collective synchronized gasp echoed through the massive ballroom. 400 guests froze in absolute stunned horror. The silence that followed was incredibly dense, suffocating in its intensity. Madison's perfect tearful smile instantly warped into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She physically stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the carpeted stage, her eyes wide with shock. Down in the front row, Patricia let out a strangled, breathless choke, her face draining of all color. Kendrick did not stop. He signaled me with a subtle wave of his hand. I hit the execution key on the digital console. The massive projection screens flanking the stage, originally meant to display a romantic slideshow of the happy couple, suddenly flared to life. The screens did not show wedding photos. They displayed high-resolution scans of the forged wire transfers, the offshore routing numbers, and the depleted charity fund ledgers. Every single stolen dollar was meticulously documented and projected in 30-foot glowing numbers for the entire Chicago elite to witness. Kendrick turned fully toward Madison, who was now trembling violently, her breathing shallow and panicked as she desperately searched the entire room for an exit that did not exist. "You wanted a public celebration of our life together," Kendrick stated, his deep voice booming over the speakers, completely devoid of mercy. "You demanded we stand before our peers and showcase the reality of our marriage. I am simply giving you exactly what you asked for, down to the very last devastating detail." The collective gasp of 400 guests was shattered by the frantic screech of a woman watching her social empire burn. Patricia lunged toward the stage, her silk gown snagging on a floral arrangement as she scrambled up the carpeted stairs. She shoved past the stunned string quartet and lunged directly for Kendrick, her manicured claws raking the air as she tried to physically rip the microphone from his hand. She screamed a high-pitched sound of pure panic, declaring that Kendrick was a deranged liar and a monster. She ordered the engineer to cut the power, waving her arms wildly to block the view. She grabbed Kendrick's lapel, her diamond bracelets clattering against his microphone stand, desperately trying to wrestle control back into her hands. Kendrick did not move an inch. He simply let Patricia physically exhaust herself against his solid frame. Before the hired security guards could reach the edge of the stage, a commanding voice pierced through the chaos. "Sit down and remove your hands from my son." Judge Eleanor Thornton rose slowly from her front row seat. The entire ballroom instantly quieted. Judge Thornton was not merely a wealthy matriarch. She was a sitting federal appellate judge with a reputation for merciless, unyielding authority. She smoothed her tailored evening jacket and locked eyes with Patricia. Her gaze was colder than absolute zero. "Let my son speak." "Patricia," she commanded, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room without a microphone, "or I will personally have you arrested and dragged out of this ballroom for disturbing the peace." Patricia froze, her fingers slowly uncurling from Kendrick's suit jacket. The threat of being led out of the Drake Hotel in handcuffs was the only thing powerful enough to penetrate her absolute hysteria. She took a trembling step backward, her face ashen, looking frantically around the room for a single sympathetic face. She found absolutely none. The society matrons and hospital board members who had been drinking her champagne just moments before were now staring at her with undisguised contempt. Seeing Patricia neutralized, I stepped out from the shadows near the edge of the stage and walked purposefully toward the elevated audiovisual booth at the back of the room. The sound engineer, a young guy in a black polo shirt, saw my expression and immediately stepped aside. I did not just want them exposed, I wanted them completely mathematically obliterated. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the primary encrypted flash drive, the master key containing the raw, unfiltered data dump I had held in reserve. I slid it into the main server terminal and bypassed the hotel's standard projection software entirely. I hijacked the main feed. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered, glitching for a fraction of a second before the romantic slideshow of Madison and Kendrick was permanently erased. In its place, a cascading wall of high-definition forensic evidence illuminated the grand ballroom. I routed the feed to cycle every 10 seconds, creating an inescapable loop of absolute financial treason. The first slide displayed the precise bank transfers from the Pediatric Charity Fund. I had magnified the routing numbers and highlighted the exact recipient accounts in blinding neon red. The guests watched in stunned silence as the screen updated, showing those exact stolen funds moving directly into Richard's failing commercial real estate holding company. The second slide was even more devastating. It displayed the proprietary source code for Madison's supposed wellness startup. I had overlaid her code right next to a generic open-source template purchased for $50 on the dark web. They were completely identical. Her groundbreaking, thriving business was a total technological mirage, a digital shell built solely to launder her husband's money. Then came the offshore accounts. The screens shifted to reveal a series of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands under Patricia and Madison's maiden names. I projected the PDF scans of the forged wire transfer authorization forms. Every single signature was blown up to 30 feet tall, clearly showcasing the shaky, forced attempts to perfectly mimic Kendrick's handwriting. The red numbers flashed relentlessly, illuminating the dark ballroom with the undeniable proof of a $2.5 million premeditated theft. I typed a final command into the terminal, locking the screens on a massive combined spreadsheet that tallied every stolen cent down to the final decimal. It was a digital execution. The reaction from the high society crowd was immediate and visceral. The initial shocked silence dissolved into a rising wave of absolute disgust. The murmurs swelled into loud, openly hostile conversations. I watched as the chief of surgery leaned over and whispered something sharply to his wife, who immediately set her champagne flute down and turned her back to the stage. Several prominent charity board members, women she knew, began pointing at the screen and shaking their heads in outright revulsion. The very people Madison had spent her entire adult life trying to impress were now looking at her as if she were a toxic contagion. The social exile Patricia had feared most was happening in real time, broadcast in high definition. Madison stood completely paralyzed in the center of the stage, the flashing red numbers reflecting off the sequins of her stolen $20,000 couture gown. She looked out at the vast sea of disgusted faces, realizing with crushing certainty that no amount of tears or fake charm could ever save her from this reality. The undeniable proof of her profound betrayal was towering over her. Her breathing turned ragged, her chest heaving as a terrifying panic finally set in. She looked at Kendrick, seeking a final lifeline, but he simply turned his back and walked away toward his mother. Utterly abandoned and completely exposed, Madison's knees buckled. Her legs simply gave out beneath the crushing weight of her own ruin. She finally collapsed onto the stage, the heavy silk dress pooling around her as her perfect facade was permanently, irrevocably destroyed. The silence inside the ballroom was shattered by a sound that made the color drain from Patricia's face. Sirens. The wail of police cruisers tore through the Chicago night, growing louder until they surrounded the Drake Hotel. Through the windows, red and blue emergency lights began to flash against the gold-leafed walls, casting erratic shadows across the terrified guests. The elite crowd stepped back instinctively, forming a wide perimeter around the stage and the immediate family. Judge Eleanor Thornton remained standing, her posture rigid, and her expression displaying no sympathy. She retrieved her phone from her jacket, holding it up for Patricia to see. She had contacted her colleagues at the federal level hours ago, handing them the cyber forensics report I had meticulously compiled. The trap was verified before the first guest arrived. The heavy gilded doors of the ballroom swung open with violent force. A team of federal agents strode into the room, their dark windbreakers cutting a stark contrast against the pastel floral arrangements. They moved with absolute terrifying purpose. They did not pause to answer questions or address the murmuring crowd. The lead agent held up a warrant, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto the targets. Richard was standing near the edge of the VIP tables. He had spent the last 10 minutes trying to remain invisible, hoping the spotlight would stay fixed on Madison's humiliation. But the moment he saw the federal windbreakers, the instinct of a cornered animal took over. He looked at the agents, looked at the evidence of wire fraud glowing on the screens, and made a desperate calculation. He abandoned his daughter. He abandoned his wife. Richard turned and bolted toward the swinging doors of the hotel's catering kitchen. He did not make it far. He shoved through the first set of double doors, knocking over a waiter carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes, sending crystals shattering across the hardwood floor. Two federal agents immediately broke off from the main formation, sprinting after him with trained efficiency. The wealthy guests gasped and parted, scrambling to get out of the way. Richard slipped on the spilled champagne, his arms flailing wildly as he clawed at the doors. Before he could regain his footing, an agent tackled him, slamming him face first into a service cart. The heavy thud echoed back into the ballroom. Simultaneously, the lead agent and two others reached the main stage. Madison was still crumpled on the carpet, her hands covering her face. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her chest heaving with violent gasping breaths. The delicate tears she had shed during her speech had been replaced by a torrent of genuine agony. Thick black mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, jagged streaks, staining the collar of her couture gown. She looked utterly pathetic, stripped of her false elegance and reduced to a trembling mess. "Stand up!" The lead agent ordered, his voice devoid of warmth. Madison shook her head, unable to form words, her nails digging into the carpet. The agent leaned down, grabbed her by the arm, and hauled her to her feet with zero gentleness. He spun her around, forcing her hands behind her back. The sharp click of handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists cut through her hysterical sobbing. Patricia screamed, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer horror. She rushed forward, her heels slipping on the stage steps. "You cannot do this!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "Do you know who we are? We are prominent citizens. This is a complete misunderstanding. You are making a terrible mistake." The lead agent did not look at her. He continued reading Madison her Miranda rights, his steady voice overpowering Patricia's frantic screeching. Another agent stepped squarely into Patricia's path, holding up a firm hand. "Step back immediately, or you will be detained for interfering with a federal investigation," he warned. Patricia froze, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, her empire of manipulation entirely powerless. Across the room, the other agents emerged from the catering kitchen. They were dragging Richard by his arms, his tuxedo jacket torn and stained with spilled wine. His face was flushed slick with sweat and terror. They marched him forcefully through the center of the ballroom, parading him past the staring, disgusted eyes of his former peers and business associates. The elite crowd whispered furiously, pointing and shaking their heads. As they dragged him toward the main exit, Richard's wild, panicked eyes darted around the room. He was searching for a way out, for a loophole for someone to manipulate. His gaze swept past the stage, past his sobbing daughter, and locked directly onto me. I stood near the sound booth, illuminated by the glow of the screens displaying his crimes. I wore my emerald green silk gown, like armor entirely untouched by the chaos destroying my biological family. A desperate, deranged glimmer of hope flared in Richard's eyes. He dug his heels into the carpet, fighting the agents just enough to slow their progress. He looked at me, a man completely stripped of his pride, reduced to begging the very daughter he had discarded and underestimated. Sienna Richards screamed, his voice raw and echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Sienna, tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you can fix this. You have the money, Sienna. Bail us out, please, you have to bail us out." The entire ballroom went dead silent, every single eye turning from Richard to me, waiting for my reaction. I stood perfectly still. I did not frown. I did not smile. I did not offer a single word of comfort or condemnation. I calmly reached over to the small cocktail table and picked up my crystal flute of vintage champagne. I held his desperate, terrified gaze, enjoying the absolute certainty of my victory. I raised the glass in a slow, silent, mocking toast to his downfall, bringing the crystal rim to my lips and took a slow, satisfying sip. The fallout was swift, absolute, and highly publicized. Within weeks, the scandal dominated every major news outlet and social media platform in Chicago. The headlines blared across the screens of morning news shows and front pages. Local real estate mogul and fake tech CEO indicted for federal wire fraud. The media ruthlessly dissected the sheer audacity of their crimes. Madison, the former golden child of the elite social circles within the city, was now sitting in a federal holding facility. Her pristine reputation was replaced by the stark reality of a looming 10-year prison sentence. The digital mirage of her wellness startup had evaporated, leaving behind a massive trail of undeniable evidence. Richard fared no better. The federal government moved with devastating speed, systematically dismantling his fraudulent empire. Every single asset he possessed was completely seized by the authorities. The offshore accounts were frozen. The sprawling suburban estate was locked down pending forfeiture. The luxury vehicles, the country club memberships, and the meticulously curated investment portfolios were entirely liquidated to begin repaying the pediatric charity fund. My biological father was stripped of his wealth, his status, and his freedom in a matter of days. He was a ruined man facing the rest of his life behind bars. Kendrick, armed with the undeniable proof I had provided, swiftly secured an annulment and assumed total control of his remaining assets. His medical career completely insulated from the blast radius of Madison and her deceit. My own life, by contrast, continued its upward trajectory with surgical precision. My firm acquired 3 new major corporate clients, directly benefiting from the sudden market vacuum created by Richard and his catastrophic downfall. I operated from the top floor of a heavily guarded corporate high-rise in the financial district, surveying a city I had conquered on my own terms. The empire I built in the shadows was now a dominant force in the daylight. Patricia did not handle the transition from high society matriarch to destitute outcast with any grace. Stripped of her stolen wealth and completely shunned by the elite circles she had spent decades worshipping, she was forced into a cheap, decaying motel on the outskirts of the city. Her designer wardrobe was sold off piece by piece just to afford basic necessities. Her pristine facade crumbled, revealing the desperate, hollow woman beneath. 6 weeks after the arrests, the sky opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour over the city. I stepped out of the revolving glass doors of my corporate building, flanked by my private security detail. The cold rain lashed against the pavement. My driver was already waiting at the curb with the door of my sleek black town car open. Before I could cross the sidewalk, a pathetic figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby concrete pillar. It was Patricia. She was completely soaked, her thin coat clinging to her shivering frame, her hair plastered against her pale face. The heavy security guards immediately stepped forward, blocking her path with imposing force. Patricia ignored them, her frantic eyes locking onto me. She looked absolutely wretched, shivering in the freezing rain, devoid of her usual arrogance and venom. "Sienna, please!" she cried out, her voice trembling violently over the sound of the pouring rain and the city traffic. "You have to listen to me." I stopped, raising a single hand to signal my security team to hold their positions. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible and worthless. "I have absolutely nothing left," Patricia sobbed, her hands clutching the collar of her cheap coat. "They took the house. They took the accounts. Madison is sitting in a jail cell, terrified out of her mind. Your father is completely ruined. We have no money for lawyers. We have no money for anything. Please, you have to help us. You have the resources. You are my daughter. I stood under the protective canopy of the building overhang, perfectly dry and entirely unmoved. I looked at Patricia without a single ounce of pity, examining her desperation with clinical detachment. She was finally experiencing the exact vulnerability and helplessness she had inflicted upon me for years. I stepped slightly closer, my expression a mask of absolute coldness. I ceased being your daughter the night you threw my 17th birthday cake in the trash, I stated, my voice slicing through the heavy rain with lethal precision. You gambled on the wrong child, Patricia. Enjoy the payout. I turned my back on her without another word. I walked smoothly to my waiting car, the door closing with a solid, satisfying thud behind me. I settled into the plush leather seat and instructed my driver to move forward. As the car pulled away from the curb, I did not bother to look back at the shivering woman standing alone in the pouring rain. The miserable chapter of my biological family was permanently closed, their toxic legacy entirely eradicated by their own greed. I poured myself a crisp glass of sparkling water from the private refrigerated console, savoring the profound, quiet peace that completely filled the dark, sleek interior of the moving vehicle. The city lights blurred through the rain-slicked windows as we navigated the busy streets. I had orchestrated a flawless execution, dismantling their fraudulent empire while securing my own untouchable success. I had faced the demons of my past and systematically destroyed them with irrefutable facts and unbreakable strategy. The scared, marginalized girl, who had once desperately begged for a tiny fraction of their highly conditional love, was completely permanently gone forever. In her place now sat a formidable woman of truly immense power, absolute financial independence, and completely unyielding strength that nobody could ever break. I had written the ultimate ending to their miserable story, and I had permanently secured the brilliant future of my very own. The rain continued to wash the city streets clean as I moved forward, leaving the wreckage entirely behind me. The morning sun cast a brilliant golden hue across the Chicago skyline, reflecting off the steel and glass monuments of the financial district. I stood in the center of my corner office, a sprawling sanctuary of polished marble and dark mahogany that occupied the entire top floor of the building. The soundproof glass eliminated the chaotic noise of the city streets below, leaving only a profound, absolute silence. It was the sound of total, unmitigated victory. Over the past several weeks, my company had experienced an unprecedented surge in market dominance, with Richard's fraudulent empire completely dismantled by federal prosecutors and his former clients scrambling for legitimate security. My firm had seamlessly absorbed the massive void he left behind. Our stock valuation had skyrocketed, breaking every projected quarterly record and solidifying my position as the premier cybersecurity architect in the region. The financial publications that once featured my father's fabricated successes were now dedicating their cover stories to my legitimate, undeniable rise. I walked over to my massive desk, running my hand along the cool, smooth surface. The heavy mahogany door to my office opened with a soft click. My highly efficient executive assistant, David, quietly stepped into the massive room carrying a breathtakingly beautiful, massive arrangement of pristine white orchids and elegant silver branches. The arrangement was a stark contrast to the usual corporate gifts I normally received from vendors and anxious politicians trying to secure our lucrative digital contracts. He placed the heavy crystal vase precisely on the center of my secondary conference table and handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a distinctive wax crest. He offered a polite nod and silently exited the room, leaving me completely alone with the highly unexpected delivery. I broke the wax seal, recognizing the emblem of the Thornton family. I pulled out the heavy cardstock. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and entirely genuine. It was signed by Kendrick and his mother, the judge. I read the words slowly, letting their profound weight settle into my mind. "Thank you for your brilliance and your integrity," the elegant script read. "You saved our family from a ruinous deception. You are always welcome at our table." I stared at the brief, powerful message. A family of true consequence, a dynasty built on actual honor and legal authority, was offering me the exact validation and inclusion my biological parents had violently denied me for my entire life. They did not see me as baggage or a convenient scapegoat to be relentlessly tortured and exploited whenever their fraudulent empire required a fresh victim. They saw the formidable, principled woman I had fought so desperately to become. I placed the card carefully on my desk, leaning it against my silver nameplate. I turned away from the desk and walked toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I looked at the glass, focusing on my own reflection, superimposed over the towering skyscrapers. I stood perfectly straight, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. I looked deep into my own eyes, searching for any lingering trace of the frightened, marginalized girl I used to be. She was completely gone, systematically eradicated by necessity and ambition. I allowed myself to fully reflect on the grueling, brutal journey that had brought me to this exact coordinate in time. 16 years of unrelenting, exhausting hard work flashed through my memory. I remembered the countless late nights spent teaching myself complex code in absolute secrecy, studying advanced corporate security protocols, while my family hosted lavish parties downstairs, deliberately excluding me from their glamorous world. I remembered the bitter, stinging tears I shed when Patricia casually threw my 17th birthday cake in the trash, dismissing my very existence as an annoying inconvenience. I remembered the deep, hollow ache of watching my parents lavish affection and stolen wealth onto Madison, grooming her to be the perfect high society fraud while treating me like a burdensome stranger in my own home. Every single insult, every cruel comparison, and every deliberate act of financial and emotional starvation had acted as a catalyst. They had tried to break me to force me into a mold of subservient mediocrity. Instead, their cruelty had forged an indestructible armor. The relentless drive to survive their toxic environment had transformed me into a lethal, highly calibrated corporate weapon. I was not the family scapegoat. I was not the forgotten middle child destined to fade into the background. I was a self-made titan. I had built a legitimate empire from absolute scratch, relying solely on my own intellect and unyielding grit. I had systematically exposed a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy, protected an innocent family from utter ruin, and watched my abusers face the exact consequences they had spent a lifetime earning. Madison was finally trading her stolen couture gowns for an orange jumpsuit, while Richard was stripped of everything he ever valued. The city stretched out before me, a vast network of endless opportunity waiting to be claimed. The rain had washed away the fraudulent past, leaving a clear, limitless horizon. This was my domain now, secured through brilliance rather than deceit, built on solid ground rather than fragile illusions. I felt a massive surge of pure, raw electric energy fiercely course through my veins. The game was far from over. The playing field had simply expanded. I turned away from the window, walked back to my desk, and confidently picked up my phone. I hit the speed dial button for my dedicated chief financial officer. He immediately answered on the very first ring, his voice exceptionally sharp, entirely alert, and completely ready for any necessary action, eagerly awaiting my next command. Gather the executive board and meet me in the primary conference room in exactly 10 minutes. I instructed, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority, ready to seize the future I had painstakingly created. Let us now prepare for the global expansion. We have got work to do. Slowly fade to black.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.